Hello, everybody. Welcome to day 17 of the Free Real Estate School for high school students. We are being joined now by two licensed realtors in the class. Started the class with us, James and Fred. You've heard me talking to them the whole time because they're the only people showing up for real estate school. And they are both now licensed real estate agents. So congratulations to you two.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
I'm proud of you guys.
It's all because of you, David Serpa. You're an awesome teacher.
Well, I'm going to take all of the credit for it. 17 days into knowing you guys, I'm definitely going to say it was because of me. No, I appreciate it.
That's what we tell everybody.
Good to know, my brother. I appreciate it. You guys are awesome. Congratulations. Welcome to the other side of things. Day 17. Boring, boring, boring. Here we go again. Chapter 61 is the Promissory Note. Chapter 62 is late charges and grace periods. Chapter 63 is prepayment penalties. Chapter 64, balloon payment notices. Chapter 65, trust deed characteristics. Chapter 66, assumptions. And we will be reading 34 pages today, from page 401 to page 435. And again, we've got Commission Bootcamp going up every day, live at 10 o'clock. You guys can watch it recorded later. We're now keeping it to about 30 minutes every day to allow it to be a little bit more watchable, keep a good lesson in it, and then that way people can tune in later and learn how they can fish on their own. Cool, cool. Here we go. Let's do it. Let's just knock this out, and then that way maybe we'll finish early. I don't know. Maybe that's okay. 4-1, 435. 435. Here we go. Chapter 61, the Promissory Note. Evidence of the debt. Most real estate, you know what, let me make this a little bit bigger so I don't have to lean so far into my computer. All right, here we go, much better. Most real estate sales hinge on financing some portion of the purchase price. A buyer promises to pay a sum of money in installments or a single payment at a future time to a lender who funds the sales transaction. Alternately, the buyer may make payments to the seller under a carryback financing arrangement. Given in exchange for property or a loan of money, the promise to pay evidences a debt owed by the buyer and payable to the seller or lender to whom the promise is made. The promise to pay is set out in a written document called a promissory note. A promissory note represents an underlying debt owed by one person to another. The signed promissory note is not the debt itself, but evidence the debt exists. The buyer, called the debtor or payer, signs the note and delivers it to the lender or carryback seller, called the creditor. The note can be either secured or unsecured. If the note is secured by real estate, the security device used is a trust deed. When secured, the debt becomes a voluntary lien on the real estate described in the trust deed, the promissory note. Notes are categorized by the method for repayment of the debt as either installment notes or straight notes. The installment note is used for debt obligations with constant periodic repayments in any amount and frequency negotiated. Variations of the installment note include interest included and interest extra. Finally, notes are further distinguished based on interest rate calculations, such as fixed interest rate notes, commonly called fixed rate mortgages, and variable interest rate notes, commonly called adjustable rate mortgages, or ARMs. Give me a moment. The power's getting ready to die here. I'm going to start it back up here. Okay, we're back. Hiya, hiya, hiya. The promissory note. The notes are categorized by the method for repayment of the debt as either installment notes or straight notes. The installment note is used for debt obligations with constant periodic repayments in any amount and frequency negotiated. Variations of the installment note include interest included and interest extra. Finally, notes are further distinguished based on interest rate calculations, such as fixed interest rate notes, commonly called fixed rate mortgages, FRMs. Oh my gosh, let's read that again. Variable interest rates, commonly known as adjustable rate mortgages or ARMs. I cannot believe I just did that. Installment note, interest included. An interest included installment note with constant periodic payments produces a schedule of payments. The schedule contains diametrically varying amounts of principal and interest from payments to payment. Principal reduction on the mortgage increases and interest paid decreases with each payment made on the mortgage. Each payment is applied first to the interest accrued on the remaining principal balance during the period between payments, typically monthly. The remainder of the payment is applied to reduce the principal balance of the debt for accrual of interest during the following period before the next payment is due. Interest included installments notes may either be fully amortized through the constant periodic payments, meaning the mortgage is fully paid at the end of the term, or include a final balloon payment after a period of installment payments called a due date. This is an example of a note secured by a deed of trust. Installment note or interest extra. Interest extra installment notes call for constant periodic payment of principal on the debt. In addition to the payment of the principal, accrued interest is paid concurrently with the principal installment. The principal payments remain constant until the principal amount is fully paid or the due date calls for a final balloon payment. Accordingly, the interest payment decreases with each payment of principal since the interest is paid on the remaining balance. Thus, unlike an interest included note, the amount of each included payment of principal and interest on an interest extra note is declining amount from payment to payment. Straight notes. A straight note calls for the entire amount of the principal to be paid in a single lump sum due at the end of a period of time. No periodic payments of principals are scheduled as an installment note. Interest usually accrues unpaid and is due with the lump sum principal installment. Thus, this form of real estate financing is sometimes referred to as a sleep trust deed or sleeper trust deed. Occasionally, the interest accruing is paid periodically during the term of the straight note, such as monthly payments of interest only with the principal all due at the end of a fixed period of time. The straight note is typically used by bankers for short-term mortgages since a banker's short-term note is not usually secured by real estate. In real estate transactions, the note evidences what is generally called a bridge loan or short-term obligation. Payment variations. While the installment note and the straight note are common, variations on the interest rate and the repayment schedules contained on the installment and straight notes are available to meet the specific needs of the lender and the borrower. The variations include adjustable rate mortgages, graduated payment mortgage, all-inclusive trust deed, and shared appreciation mortgage. Adjustable rate mortgage. The ARM, as opposed to an FRM, calls for periodic adjustments to the interest rate. Thus, the amount of scheduled payment fluctuates from time to time. The interest rates vary based on the movement in an agreed-to index, such as Cost of Funds Index for the 11th District Federal Home Loan Bank. The ARM provides the lender with a periodic increase in its yield on the principal balance during the periods of rising and high short-term interest rates. When an upward interest adjustment occurs, the note's repayment schedule calls for an increase in the monthly payment to maintain the original amortization period. If the amount of the original monthly payment is retained without an increase to reflect an increase in the interest rate, the mortgage term is extended or negative amortization occurs. Now, this is kind of what we saw with a lot of people in 2008 is, you don't see a lot of people signing adjustable rate mortgages anymore. But you could see how something like that would cause an issue if it were to happen here in 2021. Because what's happened is you've seen prices going up and up and up and up and up and up. And then along with that, you've seen rates continue to be decreased in order to empower that to happen, right? In order to make that possible. And so what happens is if somebody were to say sign an adjustable rate mortgage right now with the rates being super low, and say they locked in at 2.75%, for example, and then rates adjusted up in a couple of years after, like, say we had a depression or something like that, then what would happen is that rate would go up from 2.75% to say maybe 4.25%, right? Which would make the monthly payment go up astronomically. And that's what we saw a little bit in 2008, 2009 when a bunch of people lost their homes, is people signed adjustable rate mortgages thinking that they would either be able to sell or refinance as home prices continue to go up. And then what happened was the home prices didn't continue to go up because they were artificially inflated due to stated income, due to credit card payments, laws being restructured. And so what happened was this financial crisis of 2008. And so, but then again, you could also go take that back to the 1999 decision to remove Glass-Steagall, which FDR had, in place this act that protected the average consumer, the average small business owner, the average homeowner by separating the powers for commercial lenders and home lenders. And so they separated these two things and sort of regulated them on the federal level. But then what happened was in 1999, I believe it was 1999. 99 was Clinton, correct? Because it was under Clinton that they removed Glass-Steagall, and then what happened was these banks just went absolutely nuts. And like we say, pigs get fed and hogs get slaughtered. And what happened was the banks ultimately ended up getting bailed out, but the people did not get bailed out. And then, anyway, that was a big, long-winded reason for why I don't like adjustable rate mortgages. I don't think that there's a lot of transparency in that, especially at a time like right now when rates are so low. Okay, all right. Sorry to go off on a tangent, guys. I apologize, but that debt, the 2008 debt crisis is a very complicated thing, and it ended up happening through deregulation. Like, that's when you don't regulate greedy people and you give them, taxpayer dollars to do business with. Of course, things are going to become to what they are. All right, here we go. I can only avoid continuing to read for so long, so we're going to jump back in. Shared appreciation mortgage. Actually, no, we didn't go all-inclusive trust deed note. The AITD, variation of note, is used more often in carryback transactions than money lending. AITDs become popular in times of recession, increasing long-term rates and tight credit. The property is subject to one or more trust deed mortgages and lower than current mortgage rates, though the opposite can be the case. The AITD wraparound note typically calls for the buyer to pay the carryback seller constant monthly installments of principal and interest. The carryback seller then pays the installment due on the underlying senior trust deed note from the payments received on the AITD note. Shared appreciation mortgage. The SAM repayment schedule variation is designed to help sellers attract buyers during times of tightening mortgage money. Usually, the real estate sales volume is in general decline, following in a year by a drop in prices. The SAM is an example of a split rate note. Under a SAM note, the buyer pays an initial fixed interest rate called a floor or a minimum rate. The floor rate charge is typically 2/3 to 3/4 of the prevailing market rate, but not less than the applicable federal rate, AFR, for reported imputed interest. In return, the carryback seller receives part of the property's appreciated value as additional interest, called contingent interest, when the property is sold or the carryback SAM is due. Okay. Financial aspects. A note documents the term, for repayment of a mortgage or the unpaid portion of the sales price carried back after a down payment, including the amount of the debt, the interest rate, the periodic payment schedule, and any due date. The dollar amount of the note carried back by the seller on the installment sell as evidence of the portion of the price remaining to be paid, directly influenced by whether the carryback is an AITD note or a regular note. The face amount of an AITD note carried back by a seller will always be greater than had a regular note been negotiated in any given sales transaction. The AITD note is for the difference remaining after deducting the down payment from the purchaser price. Thus, the AITD note includes the principal amount of the wrap mortgages. However, a regular note is only for the amount of the seller's equity remaining after deducting from the purchase price the down payment and the principal balance due on the existing trust deed notes taken over by the buyer. I love that you told me that you didn't have anything better to do today, James. It's good to see you. All right. I wasn't sure if you were going to be here, like I said. So I'm glad that I'm not reading to myself. Interest rate limitations on mortgages. California usury law limits the interest rate on non-exempt real estate mortgages to the greater of 10%, or the discount rate charged by the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco plus 5%. The trust deed. In most carryback transactions, the buyer gives the seller a trust deed lien on the real estate sold as security for payment of the portion of the price left to be paid. The trust deed is recorded to give notice and establish priority of the seller's security interest in the property. A trust deed alone, without a monetary obligation for it to attach to the described property, is a worthless trust deed, for there is nothing to be secured. Although the note and trust deed executed by a buyer in favor of the seller are separate documents, a trust deed is only effective as a lien when it provides security for an existing promise to pay or perform any unlawful act that has a monetary value. Even though they are separate documents, the note and trust deed are for the same transaction and are considered one contract to be read together. Satisfaction of the debt. The promissory note, once signed by the borrower and delivered to the lender, represent the existence of a debt. When a secured debt has been fully paid, the trust deed securing the debt is removed from the title to the secured property in a process called reconveyance. Chapter 61, in the books, done. Chapter 62, late charges and grace periods. Elements of a late charge. Promissory notes contain a late charge provision. The late charge provision imposes an additional charge if payments are not received by the lender when due or within the grace period. To establish the right to enforce collection of a late charge, the following condition needs to be met by the lender or carryback seller. A late charge provision exists in the note accompanying this chapter. A scheduled payment is delinquent. A notice of amounts due is delivered by the lender or carryback seller, assessing the late charge and demanding its payment. It's a late payment provision. The dollar amount of the late charge is within the limits set by the applicable statutes and reasonableness standards, and accounting requirements for semi-annual and annual reports have been complied with. The failure of an owner to pay a late charge is a non-material breach of the note and trust deed. As a non-material breach, the failure to pay late charges cannot be the sole monetary basis for initiating a foreclosure by recording a notice of default or an NOD. Distinctions exist in the treatment of late charges permitted for private lender loans as compared to charges permitted for seller carryback paper. For private lenders, late charges on loans secured by single-family residences, SFRs, are treated differently than when they are secured by other types of property. Also, the amount of the late charge a private lender may impose is further controlled by whether or not the loan was made or arranged by the broker. The negotiations of late charge provisions. The late charge provisions included in notes used by institutional lenders are generally non-negotiable. This non-negotiable status is due primarily to lender adherence to established uniformities, such as ceilings set by statute or pooling arrangements in the secondary mortgage money market. However, the inclusions of late charge provisions in notes carried back by sellers or originated by private lenders are not automatically as boilerplate language, but are left to negotiations. Before a late charge provision is included in a note, the charge needs to be agreed to. When a late charge is referenced in a carryback note provision agreed to a purchase agreement, escrow is instructed to include the applicable late charge provision in the note prepared for signatures. Have a good night, Christian. Before a late charge provision is included in the note, this charge needs to be agreed to. When a late charge is referenced in a carryback note provision agreed to a purchase agreement, escrow is instructed to include the applicable late charge provision in the note prepared for signatures. The provision and late charge account. For a late charge provision to be complete, it needs to include the amount of late charge, the duration of any grace period followed the due date before a payment received by a lender or delinquent, and a requirement for notice from the lender to impose a late charge and demand its payment. Collectible losses. The reasonable amount of monetary losses collectible as a late charge include the actual out-of-pocket expenses incurred in a reasonable collection effort and the lost use of the principal and interest portion of the delinquent payment. Late charge notice. Late charge notice. I'm going to continue to read, but I got to go grab my charger. Otherwise, this computer's going to die eventually here. And then it's going to go. Actually, now that everyone's gone, I'm just going to read you guys out here. It's become a very loud office over the past couple of weeks. It, at one point, was a very quiet place, and now it is a very loud office, and I'm grateful for that, but it makes things a little bit more difficult in here. All right, here we go. Continuing forward. Where were we, James? I don't know. I was watching YouTube.
I'm not sure either.
All right, we'll get started back in.
Sounds good.
All right. I think we were done with this page. No, I'm just kidding. The provision and the late charge amount. For a late charge provision to be completed, it needs to include the amount of the late charge. We did read this part. Okay, collectible losses. The reasonable amount of monetary losses collectible as a late charge include the actual out-of-pocket expenses incurred in a reasonable collection effort and the lost use of principal and interest portion of the delinquent payment. To collect a late charge for a delinquent payment on a note secured by any type of real estate, the carryback seller or private lender is to notify the owner of the late charge and make demand for its payment. Private lenders are to give notice and make demand for the late charge in a timely manner by use of either a billing statement or notice sent for each payment prior to its due date, stating the late charge amount and the date on which it will be incurred, or a written statement or notice of the late charge amount due concurrent with or within 10 days after mailing a notice to cure delinquency. The notice of amounts due or the billing statement is to include the exact amount of the late charge or the formula used to calculate the charge. If the private lender fails to initiate the collection of the late charge, the lender waives its right to collect the late charge on that payment. However, failure to comply with the late charge notice requirements on a delinquency does not waive the private lender's right to enforce the late charge provision on future delinquencies. In regards to carryback notes, if on receipt of delinquent payments, the carryback seller fails to make a demand for payment of the late charge, they waive the right to collect a late charge on that installment. Late charge grace periods on private lender mortgages. 10 days is the minimum grace period allowed for a private lender secured by an owner-occupied SFR. It should be single family residence, not SRF. even if the homeowner agrees to a shorter grace period or no grace period is agreed to. The late charge amount on the private lender loan, which is not made or arranged by a broker and is secured by an owner-occupied SFR, is limited to the greater of 6% of the delinquent PI installment or $5. Mailing the installment within the grace period does not qualify the payment as timely paid. The payments need to be actually received by the carryback seller, lender, or collection agent no later than the last day of the grace period, made or arranged by brokers. When a licensed real estate broker makes or arranges a loan as for a private lender, the 6% limit for late charges established for loans secured by owner-occupied SFRs does not apply. Further, reasonableness standards do not apply as well. Instead, statutes control. For private lender loans made or arranged by a real estate broker called a brokered loan and secured by any type of real estate, the late charge is limited to the greater of 10% of the delinquent principal and interest payment or $5. Also, if the private lender loan made or arranged by a broker contains a due date for a final balloon payment, a late charge may be assessed on the final balloon payment if it is not received within 10 days after its due date. Like an owner-occupied SFR loan, an installment on a private lender loan may be arranged by a broker on any type of property, is not late if it is received by the lender within 10 days after the installment is due. One charge per delinquency. For a private lender loan secured by an owner-occupied single-family residence or one made arranged by a broker and secured by any type of property, the private lender cannot charge more than one late charge per delinquent monthly installment, no matter how many months the payment remain delinquent. Enforcement of the late charge. Refusal or failure of an owner to pay a late charge when demanded does not justify a call of the loan or initiation of foreclosure by itself. No lender or carryback seller is entitled to foreclosure on an owner who has tendered all installments which are due but has failed to pay outstanding late charges. Collection of late charges when no other monetary breach exists tend to be enforced by means other than foreclosure. Additionally, a private lender making a loan on any type of real estate is required to furnish the owner with a semi-annual accounting for the total amount of late charges due and unpaid during the accounting period. For late charges on a carryback note secured by property improved with only a 1 to 4 unit residential residence, the carryback seller needs to also provide the owner with an annual accounting statement detailing any late charges due and unpaid during the entire year. Chapter 6.2. Done. Okay, prepayment penalties. Of course, we're on page 415, and we're reading to 435. I keep trying to figure out a way that we're going to be able to finish early, but we've got 20 pages to read, and we've got 27 minutes, so we're not going anywhere, really. All right. Debt reduction, a costly privilege. Consider an owner of real estate who wants to pay off some or the entire principal on a mortgage before it's due by its terms. However, the owner has previously agreed to an additional charge the lender may levy to reduce or pay off the debt, called a prepayment penalty. The prepayment penalty agreement is included in the promissory note. It is not a provision in the trust deed since it relates to the payment of the debt, not the care and maintenance of the real estate. The unscheduled prepayment of any principals on a debt before it is due is ironically considered a privilege. Since the borrower wants to deleverage and is now able to pay off their lender, if a prepayment penalty provision is agreed to in the note, a lender can charge the owner on each exercise of the privilege. The owner may be charged whether the reduction is a portion of all the principal remaining on the debt, Enforceable penalties. Sorry. Enforceable penalties. Historically, prepayment penalties were used by lenders to prevent the loss of interest until the funds were relent to another borrower. Prepayment penalties became regulated in 2010 under the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act. Prepayment penalties are prohibited on mortgage loans which are not qualified mortgages. A qualified mortgage is any consumer loan secured by an owner or non-owner occupied 1 to 4 unit residential property. Further, prepayment provisions are also prohibited on qualified mortgages which have an adjustable rate of interest or an annual percentage rate, APR, exceeding the average prime offer rate in a comparable residential mortgage loan by set quotas. Prepayment. Sorry. Today was rough. Thursdays are awful. Wednesdays are awful. Tuesdays are awful. And I'm just feeling it lately. And we're not even like a sixth of the way through the semester. Okay. Further, I don't even know where the heck we are. Okay. Prepayment penalties on a qualified mortgage cannot exceed. We're right at the top of this page, I think. Yep, we are. Prepayment penalties are prohibited on mortgage loans which are not qualified mortgages. A qualified mortgage is any consumer loan secured by any owner or non-owner occupied the 1 to 4 unit residential property. Further, prepayment provisions are also prohibited on qualified mortgages which have an adjustable rate of interest or an annual percentage rate exceeding the average prime offer rate in a comparable residential mortgage loan by set quotas. Prepayment penalties on qualified mortgages cannot exceed 3% of the outstanding balance on the mortgage during the first year of the payment during the recording of the mortgage, 2% of the outstanding balance on the mortgage during the second year of the payment, 1% of the outstanding balance on the mortgage during the third year of payment, and 0% after the first 3 years following the recording of the mortgage. Further, a SFR, secured lender, on the payoff of a consumer mortgage may only charge a prepayment penalty if the prepayment penalty does not extend beyond the 3 years after the date of the mortgage closing. The prepayment penalty provision is not included in the terms of any refinancing by the same lender of the mortgage paid off. At closing, the borrower's total monthly payment on installment debts are less than 50% of their verified gross income, and the monthly payments do not change or adjust during the first 4-year period after closing. Due-on clause and prepayment penalties. A prepayment penalty provision in all notes secured by a trust deed containing a due-on clause and encumbering an owner-occupied 1 to 4 unit residential property are unenforceable. If the lender or carryback seller calls the mortgage due for a transfer in violation of the due-on clause, starts foreclosure to enforce a call under the due-on clause, or fails during the pendency of sale of property subject to the mortgage to approve within 30 days of receipt of the compelled credit application from a qualified buyer the assumption of the mortgage or carryback note. However, a seller carrying back a note secured by a 1 to 4 unit residential property can bar prepayment only for the calendar year of sale if they have not already carried back for more than 4 notes in the same year. Chapter 64, Balloon Payment Notices. Notes containing a balloon payment. A final balloon payment is any final payment on a note in an amount greater than twice the amount of any of the 6 regularly scheduled payments immediately preceding the balloon payment date. Final balloon payment notes contain due date provisions calling for an accelerated final payoff of the principal in a lump sum amount before the note balance has been fully amortized through periodic payments. Further, a note has a balloon payment if it contains a call provision, giving the carryback seller or lender the right to demand final payment at any time or after a specified time. Limitations on final balloon payments in consumer mortgages. Consumer mortgages are contrasted with business mortgages based on the purpose for which the funds are intended to be used. A consumer mortgage both funds a personal, family, or household purpose and is secured by a 1 to 4 unit residential property, whether or not occupied by the borrower or their family. Final balloon payments in consumer mortgages have become rare due to Regulation Z. Mortgage lenders making consumer mortgages are mandated by Regulation Z to qualify the borrower under ability to repay rules. If the mortgage complies with the Regulation Z qualified mortgage QM standards, the mortgage is presumed compliant with ATR rules. However, to be classified as a QM qualified mortgage, the mortgage needs to be fully amortized in substantially equal regular installments, a rule eliminating the inclusion of a final balloon payment provision. Final balloon payment notice and due dates. Some mortgages with due dates require a final balloon payment notice. A 90 to 150 day due date notice provision is required in notes containing a final balloon payment provision with a term exceeding 1 year if the note is carried back by a seller and secured by a trust deed on 1 to 4 unit residential units. The note evidenced a loan secured by a trust deed on an owner-occupied 1 to 4 unit residential property. A due date notice is not requested unless agreed to by both parties on transaction, including carryback mortgages secured by any type of real estate other than 1 to 4 unit residential property, whether or not owner occupied. Lender mortgages secured by any type of real estate other than owner occupied 1 to 4 unit residential units. Open-ended credit secured by any type of real estate, such as a home equity line of credit, or HELOC, and construction loans for any type of improvements. The due date notice is used to remind the owner of the secured property of a note's final balloon payment. The notice, while a reminder, gives the owner an opportunity to refinance or pay off the note. Delivery and contents of the notice. Carryback sellers and lenders need to deliver the notice to the buyer or owners of the property, personally or by first-class certified mail to the property owner's last known address. Sorry, I thought someone was walking into the office and everyone was supposed to have been gone for a while. The notice needs to be given at least 90 days, but not more than 150 days before the due date. If the notice is not timely delivered, the final due date is extended until 90 days after proper notice is given. No other terms of the note are affected. Thus, the accrual of interest and the schedule of periodic payments remain the same during the extended due date period. The failure to deliver the notice does not invalidate the note or lessen the property owner's obligation to continue making the regular periodic payments. Non-delivery of the notice merely extends the date by which the owner is obligated to pay off the note. If the owner defaults on a payment during the due date extension period, the note holder may initiate foreclosure. The dollar amount of the final blue payment and the carryback transaction needs to be computed and disclosed to the buyer. First, in a seller-backed carry disclosure statement handed to both the buyer and seller as an attachment to the purchase agreement or for further approval before the close of escrow, subject to cancellation on reasonable approval. Again, in a written due date notice of delivered at least 90 days, but not more than 150 days before the final balloon payment is enforced by the carryback seller. Additionally, the carryback note prepared by escrow includes a statutory provision calling for the final balloon payment due date notice. Okay, chapter 65, page 423. We have 12 more pages and 20 more minutes. We might finish a little early. We'll see here. 435. A security device and a lien. Financing involves a borrower who signs and delivers a promissory note to a lender or a seller as evidenced of the debt for money lent or credit extended. However, the promissory note itself is only a promise to pay as agreed. It is not a guarantee or other assurance the debt evidenced by the note will actually be repaid. A guarantee is an agreement entered into by a person who is not the borrower under the loan, known as a guarantor. The guarantee agreement obligates the guarantor to be responsible for the borrower's performance. In essence, the guarantor agrees to buy the note in the event the borrower's default. In real estate loan transactions, lenders want assurance the debt owed by the borrower will be repaid. Thus, lenders who fund real estate transactions or provide financing require borrowers to provide the real estate involved as collateral to secure the performance of the borrower's promise to pay if they default on repayment. To secure payment of the debt by a parcel of real estate, the security device used is a trust deed agreement. The trust deed is always the preferential method used to impose a lien on real estate. The lien gives the lender or carryback seller the right to foreclose on the real estate when the borrower defaults. The trust deed, by its words, purports to convey legal title to a neutral person called a trustee. In law, the title cannot be transferred. In law, the title is not transferred. Instead, the lien is created to encumber the owner's title and establish the property as security for the debt. By the use of the trust artifice, title to the property is theoretically held by a trustee as a middleman. In other words, title is held in a trust on behalf of the owner and for the benefit of the lender or carryback seller. If the borrower or owner defaults on the note, the trustee is instructed by the lender to sell the property at an auction to satisfy the debt. A trust deed lien arrangement consists of an identification of the parties, a description of the real estate liened as security, an identification of the primary money obligation, usually evidenced by a note which brought about the need for security. The terms of the lender's security interest, which is an encumbrance on the property, limited to setting out the rights and obligation of a borrower and the lender solely in regard to real estate, and the borrower's signature and notary acknowledgments. That seems a little bit bizarre to me. The term of the lender's security interest rates is an encumbrance on the property limited to setting out the rights of the obligation of the borrower and the lender solely in regard to the estate. Anyway, all right, never mind. Parties to the trust deed. The trust deed identifies three parties, each of whom has distinctly separate roles in the secured transaction. the borrower, owner, trustor, who voluntarily imposes the trust deed lien on the property, the middleman, trustee, who holds the power of sale over the property, and the lender or carryback seller, beneficiary, who benefits from the trust deed lien encumbering the property. The trustor who signs and delivers the trust deed to a lender or carryback seller is the owner of the real estate interest encumbered. Delivery is accomplished by recording the trust deed with the county recorder, which perfects its priority on title. The owner creating a trust deed encumbrance on real estate usually is the borrower of money or buyer on the property in a seller finance credit sale. The owner's real estate interest, which is encumbered, can be less than the entire fee interest, such as a fractional ownership, leasehold interest, life estate in the property, beneficial interest of creditors in existing trust deeds, equitable ownership rights under land sales contracts, and purchase rights under options to buy. For example, a condominium owner can encumber their long-term leasehold interest even though some other person is the fee owner of the real estate. The trust deed lien created by an owner of fractional interest in the real estate attaches only to the owner's interest in the property. It does not attach to the interest of any co-owners. If community property is encumbered, both spouses need to consent to the encumbrances of the community real estate interest and the exception of the attorney fees agreements in the divorce proceedings. The trustee's authority. Despite the wording in the trust deed stating the trustor hereby grants and conveys to trustee the following real property, the trustee receives no ownership or security interest in the real estate. Further, the trustee holds no legal right to any interest in the property. The trustee merely receives the authority to carry out the activities vested in the trustee by the power of sale provision in the trustee lien held by the beneficiary lender. Under the trust deed, the trustee's sole responsibilities concerning the property are to auction property at a public sale on notice from the beneficiary and reconvey title to the trustor owner and release the beneficiary lien on instructions from the beneficiary or the trustor. 3 more minutes of reading. 3 more minutes, my friend. Here we go. No possessory right transferred. Thus, the owner's possessory right to the property is never transferred to the trustee under a trust deed. The trustor, as the owner of the real estate, remains free to occupy, sell, lease, or further encumber their property subject to the existing trust deed, lien. Any person other than the owner of the real estate may serve as trustee. Any person other than the owner of the real estate may serve as a trustee. This includes the beneficiary of the trust deed, be they the lender or the carryback seller. Some private lenders name their attorney or broker as the trustee. Frequently, title and escrow companies unknowingly play the role of trustee in a particular transaction by virtue of the lender's use of the general trust deed forms distributed by title companies. Under a trust deed lien, the trustee is non-existent until the beneficiary elects to foreclose or release its security interest in the property. The trustee's conduct is in nearly all aspects completely controlled by statutes. When the trustee is called by the beneficiary to carry out its duty to foreclose or reconvey, the trustee is required to act impartially. A trust deed lien does not create a trust relationship between the parties to the trust deed. The trustee is regarded as a common agent and bears a responsibility to both the beneficiary and the trustor to absolutely follow the strict statutory foreclosure scheme. Holy smokes. The beneficiary lien holder. The beneficiary, such as a lender or carryback seller, is the entity entitled to the performance of the promised activity referenced in the trust deed as the purpose for obtaining the security. This is generally the repayment of debt evidenced by a note. The beneficiary, like the trustee, receives no ownership interest in the property, but unlike the trustee, the beneficiary holds the beneficiary, but unlike the trustee, I started thinking about the fact that the alarm's going to go off, and then my brain stopped working. But unlike the trustee, the beneficiary holds an interest in the property in the form of a lien. Okay, so that is the 5-minute alarm for class, which means that it is time to stop reading. Holy smokes, thank goodness. Somebody asked me in the last class, how come I just don't pick out a few examples and just take those and then just remove everything else? But the truth is there's so much liability involved in teaching this stuff that I don't want to get myself in any trouble. So I'd rather just do the boring thing. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, read it straight out of the book, give the input if I have any input, and then Mondays and Fridays are fun, but Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we are sludging through the mush. Okay, I'm going to check the Zoom chat to see if there's any questions in the chat. Looks like there might be one. I have some questions for you after the class, if that is okay. Yes, absolutely. I'm going to kill the Zoom meeting now, or the YouTube, Facebook. All right, hey, if you are interested in real estate school, feel free to reach out to me. You've got the number and all that good stuff. Yada, yada, yada. You know where to find me. My number is 951-691-7798. My name is David Serpa, and we teach this free real estate course every single day, Monday through Friday. And of course, Commission Boot Camp kicks off every day at 10 o'clock. Thank you for watching. Bye. Okay, in the